Title: The Summer of Wild Blackberries. Chapter 1: The Dust of Memories. Grandma Willow's house smelled of old wood, dried lavender, and the ghosts of countless summers past. Clara, with his hands full of dust while he stirred a box of old photographs in the attic, sighed. 10 years had passed since he had left Havenwood, the small town in the mountains. Appalachians, where he had grown up and where he had loved with a youthful intensity that still pierced his heart. In the photographs, Caleb smiled with that carelessness that only youth knows. His blue eyes shone with a promise that time had not kept. Clara and Caleb. They were inseparable, kings and queens of their own playworlds in the woods surrounding Havenwood. Their love, it had bloomed as wildly and freely as the wild blackberries they picked on hot summer days, but its story, like many first love stories, had ended on a sour note. Caleb had gone to university far away, with the promise to return. Clara had stayed, waiting, but the distance and the different trajectories of life had slowly eroded the link that once seemed unbreakable. Finally, the calls became less frequent, the letters ceased, and silence settled between them like an early snowfall. Now, Clara had He traveled to Havenwood for Grandma Willow's funeral, the woman who had been his anchor and confidant. The house was full of memories, each object whispering stories of a time that no longer existed, and in the air floated the inescapable possibility of meeting Caleb again. At the wake, among the familiar faces and whispered condolences, she saw him. Caleb was standing by the window, his hair now shorter and with some incipient gray hairs at his temples, but his eyes were still the same deep blue that Clara remembered. A pang of something like longing, mixed with a pang of apprehension, he pierced it. Chapter 2: The Echo of Summer Laughter. They approached each other with palpable caution, as if afraid to break a fragile bubble of time. The initial words were clumsy, full of generalities about the weather and the tranquility of the town. But as they spoke, the tension began to dissipate, replaced by an underlying familiarity, sente. They remembered the summers of their childhood, the adventures in the stream, the construction of secret forts in the woods, and, of course, the gathering of wild blackberries, with their fingers and lips dyed a dark purple. The laughter, although a little rusted by time, resonated in the room, echoes of a youthful joy that seemed to have been suspended in the air of Havenwood. Caleb told Clara about his life away, his work as an architect in a big city, the relationships that had come and gone. Clara told him about her career as a photographer, her travels, and the loneliness he often accompanied her despite being surrounded by people. They found common ground in nostalgia, in the tacit understanding of a shared past that no one else could fully understand. It was as if a part of them had remained intact, frozen in the time of their youth in Havenwood. Chapter 3: Walks along familiar paths. During the days following the funeral, Clara and Caleb spent a lot of time together. They walked along the wooded paths they knew by heart, the crunch of dry leaves under their feet like a soundtrack to their memories. They stopped next to the stream where they had once sworn eternal love by carving their initials into an old oak tree. The initials were still there, fading under the rough bark, a silent testament to a youthful promise. They talked about what had happened, about the distance that had come between them, about the decisions they had made and the opportunities they had missed. There were no recriminations, just a melancholic sadness for what could have been. One afternoon, while they were sitting atop their secret mountain, overlooking the Havenwood Valley bathed in the golden light of the sunset retisser, Caleb turned to Clara. "I always thought we would meet again," he said, his voice soft. "That Havenwood would bring us together somehow. I expected it too, in some from my mind," Clara responded, looking at the familiar landscape. "But life has a way of taking us down unexpected paths." There was a palpable tension in the air, a feeling of opportunity, of the untaken and persistent feelings that had not yet been completely extinguished. Chapter 4: The Bittersweet Taste of Blackberries. One day, while cleaning Grandma Willow's garden, they found Aaron an old wild blackberry bush, covered with ripe dark fruits. They decided to pick some, reviving an old tradition from their childhood. While their fingers were stained purple and the sweet and slightly acidic taste of the blackberries filled their mouths, the atmosphere between them became more intimate. They remembered the competitions of who could pick the most blackberries, the laughter and the fights to end as. "Do you remember when you fell into the stream trying to reach those mulberries on the other side?" Caleb asked with a smile. Clara laughed. "And you laughed so much that you almost fell in too." At that moment, for a fleeting instant, they felt they were again the carefree youths of yesteryear, with the world full of infinite possibilities. But the reality of the years gone by and the separate lives soon got in the way. Later that night, sitting on the porch of the grandmother's house, sharing a jar of blackberry jam they had made together, the conversation turned. It was more serious. "Clara," Caleb began with a hesitant tone in his voice, "did you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different?" Clara looked into his eyes. The same question had tormented her for years, especially on lonely nights. "Of course," she answered honestly. "There were many what-ifs in my life." "In mine too," she admitted. "Caleb, I always felt that a part of me stayed here with you in Havenwood." Chapter 5. The Shadow of Past Decisions. The days in Havenwood began to run out. Clara knew that soon she would have to return to her city life. The prospect of leaving Caleb again filled her with a deep sadness. They spent their last afternoon together on their secret mountain. The silence between day were different now, charged with unresolved tension, unspoken words, and feelings struggling to surface. Finally, Clara broke the silence. "Caleb," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "These last few days have meant a lot to me. They have reminded me of what we once had." Caleb took her hand. Her fingers were rough, different from the soft hands of the young man she remembered. "For me too, Clara. I never forgot what we shared." "But time has passed," Clara continued with a lump in her throat. "We have lived different lives. We are pers—" There was an undeniable truth in his words. The young lovers who once were had been shaped by separate experiences, by joys and sorrows that the other had not shared. Could their lives really fit back together after so long? "Does that mean that this is all?" Caleb asked, with a longing look in his eyes. Clara turned away from the Rada, feeling the tears stinging her eyes. "I don't know, Caleb. I don't know what is possible after so much time." Chapter 6. The Farewell at the Threshold. The day of Clara's departure arrived. Caleb accompanied her. He accompanied her to the entrance of Grandma Willow's old house. The air was heavy with a silent melancholy, the weight of unspoken words floating between them. "Thank you for these days, said Clara, her voice choked. "They meant more than I can express." "To you too, Clara," he replied with evident sadness on his face. "I will always treasure our memories." There was a moment of uncomfortable silence, a tacit opportunity to cross an invisible line, to say the words that could change everything. But the fear of the unknown, the weight of the past, and the uncertainty of the future kept them immobile. Finally, Clara took a step toward her car. She turned to look at Caleb one last time. Her gaze was a mixture of longing, regret, and in deep sadness. "Goodbye, Caleb," she said, her heart heavy. "Goodbye, Clara," he replied, his voice barely audible. While Clara drove down the dusty road that took her away from Havenwood, he looked in the rearview mirror. Caleb remained standing in the same place, his solitary figure under the shadow of the trees. The bittersweet taste of wild blackberries remained in his memory. Rhea, a reminder of a youthful love that had been beautiful and fleeting, a closed chapter but never forgotten. She knew that a part of her would always remain in Havenwood, tied to the memories of Caleb and the summers of his youth. And although life had taken them down separate paths, the connection they once shared would remain an indelible part of their stories. Epilogue. Clara returned to her city life, but Havenwood and Caleb remained engraved in her heart. Sometimes, on quiet nights, she remembered the taste of wild blackberries and the sound of laughter, Caleb in the forest. Years passed. Clara continued her career, traveling and experiencing life. She had other relationships, but none completely erased the mark of first love. One day received a postcard from Havenwood. It was from an old friend, informing her that Caleb had married and had a family. Clara felt a pang of something like sadness, but also a sense of closing scene. Caleb had found his own way, his own happiness. Years later, Clara returned to Havenwood to visit Grandma Willow's grave. She walked along the familiar paths, now covered in moss and fallen leaves. He stopped by the old oak tree with its faded initials. He found the wild blackberry bush, still bearing fruit every summer. He picked some, the flavor agridulce evoking once more the memories of her youth and of Caleb. At that moment, she understood that her story with Caleb was not a fairy tale with a traditional happy ending. It was a story, agridulce, marked by the fleeting beauty of first love and the melancholy of lost opportunities. But it was also a story of growth, of acceptance, and of the understanding that some mores, although they do not last forever, leave an indelible mark on the soul. And in the silence of the Appalachian Mountains, the echo of her youth and her love for Caleb would continue to resonate softly, like "Ooh, that old summer song." End.